Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Charles Lipson, Professor Emeritus at the University of Chicago. Charles, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm pleased. Anything happened this week?
I don't know, was it the New Hampshire primary, perhaps? Should we talk about that? Or do you want to talk about the
Uh,
weather?
well, everybody who was in New Hampshire reporting on it was talking about the weather, that's for sure. And even more in Iowa, weren't they? I mean, it was a real test of, and people say, well, there's only 100,000 or whatever it is in Iowa who voted. But you're trying to test all kinds of different things, including intensity of preferences. And anybody who goes out in 0 degrees temperature in Iowa, that was intense preference. Um, well, let's talk about New Hampshire for a minute. Uh,
Yeah, let's set the scene for our viewers. Donald Trump won New Hampshire pretty handily by over 10 points from Nikki Haley. What's your reaction?
um, you know that old joke, there's good news, there's bad news? That's the
Yes.
story for Trump. The good news is that, as he says, he not only won, but Nikki says she finished second, and Trump, who is a master at the media, said she finished last. Uh, and she lost by a good deal, and she lost in her most favorable state, I would say. That is, the Republicans there. Many of them are moderate. It's a much more moderate state than, say, South Carolina or Iowa. South Carolina is coming up on February 24th. A lot of the Nevada, which Nikki Haley is skipping, is coming up between now and the 24th of February. So it was her most favorable territory, and yet she didn't come within 10 points. That's um, that's the good news for Trump. The bad news for Trump is that he he's really running as an incumbent, the person who, at least for the Republicans, he's the incumbent, and he's not winning a lot over 50% of the vote. And the polls are saying that a lot of people wouldn't vote for him in the general election. It's hard to know if they really mean that. They may be like all those Hollywood stars who say they're going to move to Canada when, and then somebody informs them that Canada is really cold and Hollywood is really kind of not. And then they decide, oh, well, I think I can stay.
I
So
want to
it's
get
hard to
to.
know if they really, yeah, it's hard to know if they really mean it. But it's not really encouraging for Trump. And the fact that Nikki is staying in is it won't mean that he won't get the nomination overwhelmingly. He will, but it diverts his time and attention and money.
I do want to talk about the bad news later, but let's talk about Nikki Haley first. And from what you're saying, it sounds like you think a win for Donald Trump being the nominee is inevitable. I want to quote you from something you wrote before the primary. This is what you wrote. Quote, DeSantis' loss in Iowa doomed him. Haley must win New Hampshire and South Carolina to survive. She didn't win New Hampshire. South Carolina is about a month away. So is her campaign effectively over, do you think?
Well, she doesn't think it's over, but I do.
She doesn't
And
think it's
she's
over, but everyone in the media thinks it's over. What's the disconnect here?
I just wrote a column for Spectator, and I start off with something that you probably remember, Brittany, from all those cartoons where Wile E. Coyote runs straight off the cliff and he hangs in midair because he hasn't looked down. As soon as he looks down, he's in trouble and down he goes. And I think that Nikki has run off the cliff, but she hasn't looked down yet. And in fact, her speech after losing in New Hampshire was really a victory speech. That was, I assume it was for to keep her donor base and her campaign enthusiastic. She couldn't actually believe that. So it's kind of perplexing why she is staying in. Her one thing I should say, she would be forced out if she didn't have money. That in the end is what happened to DeSantis. It's not that the money bags control everything. They're looking at the votes. They just didn't see a path for DeSantis. They pulled in their money. It's not clear who's funding Nikki Haley. But so far, they haven't pulled the funds. If they are Democrats or something, they won't pull the funds because the longer they can keep her in the race, the better. But let me tell you what the confusion that I have, my perplexity in thinking about her position is. If she she lost in New Hampshire, her best state. She's 30 points behind in the polling in South Carolina, her home state. Every major Republican politician in the state has endorsed Trump, save one member of the House, U.S. House. So they've all are on board, including Tim Scott, who she appointed to the Senate. So they all think that Trump will win, and they want to be on the winning side. So why is she staying in? Well, one reason, of course, could be the kind of black swan event, that there's a health problem or something else with Trump. Let's leave that aside. There's no predicting that. She could be setting herself up for a third party run. If she does that, she's finished as a Republican. She can't come back as a Republican after doing that, because she would draw a lot of votes away from Trump and probably keep him out of the White House. If she's setting herself up for another Trump loss, and by the way, I don't just mean he lost in 2020. He dragged down the Republican Party in 2018, 2022, and 2023. And if he not only loses this time, but drags down the party down ballot in 2024, the party will blow up and they'll have to reform. And she may be thinking, I could be the person who becomes, in effect, the leader because I was the last person standing. There would be a fight between, if you will, the Ron DeSantis wing of the party and the more conventional Mitch McConnell, George H.W. Bush side of the party. But Trump has transformed the party, and it's really hard to see how Haley would win under those circumstances. But that's my, top of the head thought.
Well, her speech after New Hampshire had that victorious tone, like you said. It reminded me of a speech last week, and that was Ron DeSantis after coming in second in Iowa. He said, "We punched our ticket out of Iowa." He ended his campaign, obviously, just a few days later. But everyone is now, who has dropped out, is lining up, kissing the ring of Donald Trump. We saw that with Ron DeSantis and his somewhat lukewarm endorsement of Trump. We saw that with Tim Scott, who is more fervently endorsing him. So I am curious, because these people, it does seem like they're trying to preserve their political future for in 4 years to be that leader of the Republican Party. Does Nikki Haley, if she stays in this race, does she have a political future?
Only if Trump loses badly enough to carry down what he has built, which is a Republican Party in his own image, which is populist, right wing, instead of what I would call more conventionally conservative, which is what a lot of Midwestern voters are. That's why it was so surprising, in a way, that Trump was such a convincing winner in Iowa, which is a Midwestern state where voters are kind of conventional conservatives. By that I mean that they're Reaganite type conservatives. They don't want to blow up the kitchen stove. They want lower taxes. But there's also a division in the party about internationalism. We can talk about that if you want, but that's also a real departure from the older Ronald Reagan. We fight the Soviet Union. Remember, you may not remember, but you may have read that somebody asked him once what was his idea about the Cold War, and he said, "We win, they lose." And real clear, real straightforward. Um, but it seems like the country is so much more divided now, and it seems like the divisions have an almost religious quality, I think. Don't you, Brittany? I mean, people aren't just wrong on the other side, they're apostates. They're going to burn in hell.
So I am curious. You posed this question how Trump captured his party. Can you explain that?
Yes. Um, I think that there were a couple of things. One was that the wars in the Middle East that George W. Bush engaged in which were very costly in blood and treasure, and we didn't win. And they opened up Iran for a much more powerful future in the region. That was part of the problem. Um, I just think that more voters on the Republican side became increasingly concerned about a large administrative state run out of Washington and controlling so many aspects of their lives. And um, we're not ruled anymore by laws. We're ruled by bureaucrats who are unelected, who make a lot of rules. Think about all these rules about cutting out gas stoves, moving very aggressively to electric cars. These may be good moves or bad moves. You can have your own view about that, but they're not really laws that were passed by Congress. The Congress passed a very broad laws. Sort of, we want the air to be clean, we want the water to be clean, and then the law will say 2,600 times the Secretary of Energy shall. And of course, the Secretary of Energy doesn't do anything. He or she delegates it down to their middle level bureaucrats. Well, if you don't like those rules, um, you tough luck. Basically, it costs you a fortune to oppose them in court, and you don't even get to go to court first. The bureaucracies uh, make the rules. That is, they're the legislature. They enforce the rules. That is, they're the executive branch. They're executing the rules. And then they are often the first judge if you want to contest the rules or their application to you. So that's the judicial branch. So they're all three branches consolidated in a non-elected mid-level bureaucracy that is very difficult to contend. And Donald Trump was the spokesman for opposition to that, and the spokesman for, I think, um, the people who used to be Harry Truman Democrats, in Franklin Delano Roosevelt Democrats, who were working class people who felt like the economy was leaving them behind and all the federal government and all the corporations' resources were being devoted to the boss's pay and to DEI and to other things. And Trump served as a kind of spokesman against all of that.
He's a spokesman for some, but not a spokesman for all, as we saw from polls coming out last night. A Fox News poll found that 35% of New Hampshire Republican voters would not vote for him if he was the nominee in November. So when you hear that number, I know that's just New Hampshire, but how troubling is that for him?
Very. It's very troubling. Now, that might not be the case, but remember, the last election came down to about 5 or 6 states that were fairly close. Remember what Fani Willis and the others in Georgia brought him up on is election interference because he was trying to get something like 11,000 votes. I mean, not a large number. Uh, the problem isn't New Hampshire. The problem will be Pennsylvania, Michigan, where he's got a lot of opposition from Muslims. But I think, by the way, if you don't mind, I think that his problem in Michigan is not so much the Muslims, it's going to be auto workers because the auto industry is just being reamed by these electric vehicle mandates. The only automaker that's making any money on electric vehicles is Tesla. GM and Ford are losing fortunes, and this is a real problem for workers there. So I see a lot of problems there. Um, Biden, he could be weekend at Bernie's Biden and still win California and New York. But these close states are going to be a problem if Trump can't bring over all the Republican base. But his real problem is bringing over independents, especially educated, middle income, especially women. I think he'll have a problem. Biden, on the other hand, will have a problem with African Americans and especially with Hispanics. Cities like Chicago, there is a huge growing split between Hispanics and African Americans over immigration and what it's doing to the city because it's leading to a huge fight over resources between two groups that need those resources and are competing for jobs as well.
I'm curious on how you think Trump will win over those independent voters because his tone is the same as it was in 2016 as it was in 2020. I want to read you something he posted on Truth Social. I don't need any advice from Rhino Kayleigh McEnany on Fox. Just had a giant victory over a badly failing candidate, Bird Brain, and she's telling me what I can do better. Save your advice for Nikki. And as we know, Kayleigh McEnany was his very loyal former press secretary. So if he's disparaging her on social media, how does he bring people into the fold? How does he not alienate part of his party that is voting for Nikki Haley that wanted another Republican option?
He can't help himself, really. That's who he is. Uh, Everything is transactional. Um, you and I have friends, and we stick with them whether we agree or disagree on this or that issue. It takes a lot to break with them. Trump is not that way. If Tim Scott had not endorsed him, Tim Scott would be a bad guy. He would be subject to all these things. That has its upside, which is if you're Iran or you're Putin or you're Xi Jinping, you could be scared of this because he's just ruthless and he's willing to be ruthless and he can change on a dime. Um, but I think the right way to frame it is less how Trump is going to win them over as who these people hate the most. This is a negative election. This is going to be a negative election. So it's not going to be so much except for the Republican base wants to vote for Trump. That's why there was really no path in the end for DeSantis. He tried to say, well, Trump is squishy on social issues. Wasn't DeSantis's best claim. I thought his best claim is we all agree on among Republican conservatives on what we want, but Trump wasn't able to implement it. I will be able to. That I thought was his best claim. But even if he'd made that claim, once Republican voters thought that Trump could win, they were going to stick with him, win in the general election. And once they saw that he was still vigorous on the stump and so forth, they were going to stick with him. But I don't think there are any people like that in the Democratic Party. They will accept Biden but they're not real Biden enthusiasts in the party. Remember last time. Um, remember last time he kept pointing out, and a lot of the people who thought he would win kept pointing out, there are no people at a Biden rally. What they didn't get, and there are huge numbers at Trump rallies, what they didn't get was that if there had been an anti-Trump rally, there would have been huge numbers. So I think the first thing is there's going to be a big anti-Trump vote and there's going to be a big anti-Biden vote, and the winner will be the one who gets the most of the anti-votes.
Well, Charles, we are down to two contenders for the GOP nomination. We're a bit more than a month out from Super Tuesday. What do we need to keep our eye out between now and then?
I think one question will be, will can Nikki Haley withstand the heat? There'll be more and more pressure on her to withdraw. We need to see who's funding her and keeping her in the race. If it turns out that those are mostly liberal and Democratic donors, then she will say, "See, I'm the one who can bring those donors in back into our fold and win in November." But Trump will say, "Look, those people are not going to vote for you in November. They're just keeping you in the race to bring me down." And the longer she stays in, the more Trump will tar her and diminish her future. So it will become more and more puzzling. A final thing really is Trump's legal issues. We need to talk about those first. When Alvin Bragg, the man, brought charges against Trump for inflating his real estate assets, his numbers began to surge among Republicans, because what base voters see is not just Democrats, but Democrats using all the state power they have to keep him off the ballot, to put him into court during an election year, the deep state undermining him. They just see all these things against him. And uh, the worst case ways for Trump, because it's a state level case and he can't pardon himself, and the governor cannot pardon him unless they change the law. The governor has 20 years of the guy being in jail before he can pardon him. And so that Willis's trips with her alleged lover, who was using all this payment that Funny Willis offers, that is just a godsend for Republicans and for Trump in particular. So I think that the legal troubles are a potential issue for him. There are a lot of Republicans, you've cited polls, but there are a lot of polls that say if he were convicted of a crime, um, then then that would cause them not to vote for Trump. Again, we don't know. It's going to be a negative. If you ask them about Trump, they don't like Trump. If you ask them about Biden, they don't like Biden. The wild card for Biden is actually the economy. If the economy really turns up, that's a huge plus for all Democrats, including Biden.
Well, there's a lot between now and November. I know that to be certain. And in my 8 years of covering politics, I feel like every year we have been in unprecedented times. That's what I can say today. Charles, I always enjoy your conversations. Thank you so much for coming on, and I hope you join me again soon.
I love talking with you, Brittany, and I do look forward to doing it again soon.
Thank you.